Marianne clutched her twin daughters close as the wind sliced through the alleyway like a blade, lifting her threadbare shawl and exposing her bruised hands to the cold. She had stood in the same corner for hours, her back against a soot-stained wall, murmuring please for the girls to strangers who passed with turned faces and hurried steps. The streets of Leeds had never been kind, but since Richard's accident at the mill, they'd become merciless. It had been 3 months since the foreman came to the door with his hat in his hands and eyes too ashamed to meet hers. One slip of a pulley, one crushed chest, and she was a widow with nothing but 2 infants and unpaid rent. The landlady had given her 2 weeks. The factory refused her work. We don't take women with babes. And the church pantry, after 3 visits, had run out of pity. Her legs trembled as much from hunger as cold, but she dared not sit. People noticed the upright. They pitied the ones who looked too proud to beg, but too poor to hide it. Eliza and Clara, barely a year old, whimpered in her arms, their cheeks red from the wind. She sang to them softly between pleas, a lullaby her mother used to hum, as if melody might mask the desperation. Then came the sound of hooves, not clattering like a cab or delivery cart, but measured, deliberate. A black carriage rolled past, then stopped. She turned slightly, not expecting anything but perhaps another scolding. Instead, the door opened and a tall man stepped down. He wasn't like the others. No quick glance and recoil. He looked at her, truly looked. "Are they yours?" he asked, voice low but not unkind. Marianne nodded, breath caught in her throat. "And your husband?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Gone." The man studied her for a moment longer, then removed his gloves, revealing pale, uncalloused hands. "Come with me," he said. No explanation, no condition, just an invitation. She should have asked questions, but her legs were already moving. For the first time in months, she followed something other than fear. She followed hope. The carriage creaked through the countryside as Marianne held her daughters tightly, afraid even to blink, lest the moment vanish like fog in sunlight. Eliza stirred against her chest, and Clara let out a soft sigh, their breath warm on her neck. Outside the window, the soot and grime of Leeds faded into green hills and pale sky. She dared not speak. The nobleman, still nameless, sat across from her in silence, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Once, their eyes met, and she quickly looked away, ashamed of her cracked lips and hollow cheeks. When the horses slowed, she peeked out again. A large stone house stood beyond an iron gate, ivy crawling across its face, the windows tall and shining. It wasn't grand like the estate she'd cleaned in better times, but it was dignified, old, proud. A place where lives were shaped, not shattered. The coachman helped her down, and the man offered his hand. Not out of formality, but to steady her as her worn shoes sank into gravel. "This way," he said, guiding her up the steps. Inside, warmth embraced her. Firelight flickered across carved wood panels, and the scent of fresh bread floated in from somewhere deeper in the house. A woman appeared, a housekeeper perhaps, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Prepare the east guest room," the nobleman said simply, "and warm milk for the children." He turned to Marianne then, his gaze softer now. "You'll stay here until we decide what comes next." She opened her mouth to protest, to ask what he wanted in return, but the words died on her tongue. He was already walking away, boots echoing down the hall. The housekeeper led her to a room with lace curtains, a fireplace already crackling, and a cradle waiting beside the bed. She stood frozen until the woman gently touched her arm. "You're safe here," she said. "He may not say much, but he doesn't bring people in for no reason." That night, as her daughters slept beside her for the first time in warmth, Marianne sat awake, staring at the flames. She didn't trust fate, not anymore. But something in that man's eyes told her this wasn't charity. It was a beginning. A dangerous, uncertain one, but a beginning nonetheless. Marianne woke before the sun, unsure for a moment where she was. The softness of the mattress beneath her felt foreign, like a lie whispered to a desperate heart. Her daughters still slept, their tiny limbs relaxed, their breaths steady. A rare mercy. She slid from under the covers and moved toward the window. Mist blanketed the fields beyond the manor, soft and haunting, like the veil between her past and whatever this was becoming. She didn't know the nobleman's name, nor why he had stopped, nor what he expected. Her mind spun with possibilities, fears, bargains she was unwilling to make. She'd known men who gave with one hand and took with the other, who fed your children so they could own your soul. She would not become someone's shadow again. As if summoned by her thoughts, the housekeeper knocked gently and entered with a tray. "For you," she said. "Porridge, fruit, warm milk. Too much." "Why is he doing this?" Marianne asked before she could stop herself. The woman, Agnes, as she introduced herself, didn't answer immediately. "Lord Ashcombe has his ways. He doesn't speak of them, but he lost someone too, a long time ago." That didn't ease Marianne's suspicion, but it softened something inside her. Grief recognized grief, even in silence. Later that morning she ventured downstairs, drawn by the sounds of clinking dishes and voices. The manor staff watched her with guarded politeness, but no cruelty. In the sitting room, Lord Ashcombe stood near the fire, reading a letter. When he noticed her, he folded it away without comment. "You are welcome here," he said without preamble. "There are no debts to repay, not yet. Rest, feed your children. We will speak again." It should have comforted her, but his words unsettled her more than silence. Not yet. What did that mean? Was there a clock already ticking above her head? That evening, after putting the girls to sleep, she sat in the hallway outside their room, watching the shadows dance on the walls. She didn't belong here, not among chandeliers and oil paintings, but the sound of her daughters sleeping peacefully wrapped around her like a prayer. She didn't trust the house. She didn't trust the man. But for the first time in months, she didn't flinch at the quiet. Marianne found the library by accident, chasing after Eliza, who had toddled out of the nursery with a sock in her mouth. The room was vast and warm, lined with shelves that stretched to the ceiling, filled with volumes so old they seemed to hum with dust and secrets. She paused at the threshold, Eliza giggling in her arms, unsure if she was allowed in. Then she saw him. Lord Ashcombe sat at a large oak desk, his coat discarded, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked younger this way, less like a nobleman and more like a man who had once wanted other things. His eyes lifted when he noticed her, and for the first time he smiled. Briefly, but enough to make her forget her doubts for a breath. "She's quick," he said, nodding at Eliza. "Takes after her mother, I imagine." She smiled, unsure how to answer. "I didn't mean to intrude, "You're not intruding," he said. "This is your home for now. If the door is open, walk through it." She stepped inside cautiously and set Eliza down, watching her stumble toward a low table where picture books lay scattered. "Do you read?" he asked. "A little. Enough to get by. Richard taught me when we married." "Then you'll like this." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a sealed letter, yellowed at the edges. "I wrote this 10 years ago. Never sent it. It's to my wife." Marianne's breath caught. "She's gone, in childbirth. Our son didn't survive either." He placed the letter on the desk without opening it. "You don't have to read it, but I keep it close, to remind myself what I lost, and what I might still be capable of giving." Marianne didn't touch it, but she understood. Pain, when shared, didn't lessen. It became bearable. "I don't want charity," she said softly. "Then don't take any," he replied. "Take sanctuary. It's different." That night, back in her room, Marianne watched her daughters sleep, her fingers brushing the frayed edges of her shawl. She had walked through many doors in her life, kitchens, mills, back alleys, but none like this. A place where ghosts weren't banished but invited to sit quietly by the fire, acknowledged but not fed. She wasn't safe yet, but maybe she wasn't entirely lost. By the week's end, Marianne ventured into the village with Agnes, her daughters bundled in borrowed wool and cheeks kissed red by the breeze. The manor carriage drew curious glances as it rolled over cobblestones, and whispers followed their steps like shadows. "That's her," someone murmured near the bakery. "The widow with the twins." Another voice chimed, half sneer, half awe. "Living under Lord Ashcombe's roof, they say." Marianne held her head high, though her fingers tightened around the girl's hands. She wasn't ashamed of being poor, but she knew how the world turned women like her into stories, ones told in corners with raised brows and lowered voices. Inside the grocer's, Agnes chatted cheerfully, but Marianne could feel eyes on her. Even as she measured oats or selected apples, she heard the judgment in silence. She didn't belong in their tidy world of husbands and hearths. She was the smudge in the frame, the scandal waiting to hatch. On their way out, a woman in a fine bonnet blocked her path. "You're staying at Ashcombe Manor?" Her tone was edged with ice. Marianne nodded. "Just for a while. Some of us worked our whole lives and never earned such charity." Marianne met her gaze. "Some of us lost everything without doing anything wrong." The woman's mouth tightened, but she stepped aside. That night, Marianne found herself in the manor's garden, staring out at the moonlit hedges. Lord Ashcombe joined her without announcement. "I heard there was conversation in the village," he said. "You don't owe them explanations." "No," she replied, "but they'll invent them anyway." He looked down at her daughters, asleep in the pram between them. "Let them talk. Eventually, they'll tire." She turned to him. "Why do you care? Truly, I need to understand." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a ribbon, faded, blue, and delicate. "It was my wife's," he said. "She once said if we couldn't save the whole world, we could at least save someone." He handed it to Marianne. "You're not saved yet, but I thought I'd start somewhere." Her throat tightened as she took it. It wasn't a promise, but it was something even rarer. A man brave enough to see her and not turn away. The storm came without warning, spring wind turning cruel, clouds boiling over the hills like angry smoke. Marianne was in the nursery with the twins when she smelled it. Sharp, acrid, unnatural. Smoke, her heart stopped. She grabbed Eliza and Clara, one under each arm, and burst into the hallway shouting for help. Agnes came running from the servants' quarters, her apron already damp, with panic. "The East Wing chimney! It's caught!" someone yelled from downstairs. Flames hadn't yet reached them, but the smoke thickened fast. Lord Ashcombe appeared through the haze, face dark with soot, coat thrown over his shoulder. "Give me one," he called, reaching for Clara as Marianne clutched both girls. She hesitated. Instinct screamed to keep them close, but the fire crackled louder, and there was no time. She handed Clara to him and ran after, Eliza pressed against her. Down the narrow servants' stairs they fled, past shouting voices, the creak of stressed beams, and the heat rising behind them like a curse. They burst into the courtyard where staff were already gathering. The night was sharp with rain and terror. Marianne collapsed on the grass, coughing, trembling, cradling Eliza as Lord Ashcombe crouched beside her with Clara, holding a blanket tight around them both. "They're all right," he said, voice rough. "You got them out. You saved them." But she wasn't hearing him. She was back in the tenement 3 winters ago when her neighbour's flat had caught fire. Richard had run in. He never came out. Her tears came like floodwater now, not for the fire, but for the memory it had reopened. Lord Ashcombe didn't speak. He simply sat beside her in the mud and the ash, one child in his arms, the other curled against her chest, and waited. When dawn broke, the fire was out. The damage was contained. But something had shifted between them, as fragile and undeniable as breath. Later, as Marianne washed soot from her daughters' faces, she caught her own reflection in the glass. Softer, stronger, more alive than the woman who had begged in the streets. She'd saved them, and someone had helped her without asking for anything in return. It felt like faith, even if she couldn't name it yet. The east wing remained blackened, its walls scorched and bitter with smoke. But life inside Ashcombe Manor carried on. Days passed with quiet repairs and careful glances, none more loaded than those exchanged between Marianne and the lord of the house. He had been distant again, polite but unreadable, his words measured, his appearances brief. It was as if the fire had stirred something in him too, something he wasn't ready to face. One evening, as dusk turned the garden silver, she found him in the chapel. The room was small, tucked beside the greenhouse, lit only by 2 candles and a window of stained glass that cast blue and crimson across his face. He sat in the pew, hands clasped, a book unopened beside him. She hesitated at the door. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not," he replied without looking back. She stepped inside slowly, lowering herself onto the pew behind him. "You saved Clara's life." "I haven't said thank you." "You did," he murmured, "when you handed her to me. That was trust. It meant more than words." Silence fell, soft but deep. Then, without warning, he spoke again. "My father was a cruel man. He believed compassion made you weak. When my wife died, he told me to remarry within the year, said grieving was for the poor." Marianne's breath caught, not from surprise but recognition. "And did you?" Number Y left, travelled for years, but eventually I returned. I couldn't fix what was broken, but I could build something different. He turned then, his eyes clearer than she'd ever seen them. "When I saw you in the street that day, I remembered what it was like to be silenced by grief. I wanted to give you a place to breathe again." Marianne swallowed hard. "And when I can stand on my own, then you'll decide whether to leave or stay." Her chest ached, not with fear, but with the unfamiliar weight of being given a choice. Real choice. She stood and reached for the candle nearest her. "Then I promise," she whispered, "if I stay, it will be by my own will, not as a burden, not as a rescued soul, but as someone who finally learned to live again." For the first time he smiled without sorrow in his eyes, and in that chapel, without confession or prayer, something holy passed between them. Spring settled over Ashcombe Manor like a soft quilt, coaxing blossoms from bare branches and laughter from rooms that once held only silence. The twins now toddled through the hallways like determined little queens, their giggles echoing off stone and wood. Marianne found herself in motion again, not just surviving, but living. She helped in the kitchens, tended herbs in the greenhouse, read to the girls beneath the willow tree. Her hands no longer trembled from cold, but from the unfamiliar steadiness of routine. Still, she remained cautious. Lord Ashcombe kept his distance, as if afraid that closeness might shatter the delicate peace they'd built. But he watched her, always, quietly. And she, in turn, felt the strange warmth of knowing she was seen not as a guest nor a burden, but a woman becoming whole. One afternoon she walked into the village alone, no carriage, no Agnes, just herself, a basket, and a heart testing its own strength. The whispers still stirred, but they were fainter now. Some villagers nodded. One elderly woman even offered her a sprig of rosemary with a kind smile. "You look brighter," she said, "like someone coming back from the dead." Marianne managed a laugh. "Feels a bit like that." At the bakery, she traded a day's work for 2 fresh loaves. At the apothecary, she asked about tinctures for cough and colic, her fingers tracing the labels with remembered ease. She was no longer the desperate shadow on the corner. She was someone rebuilding. That evening, as she returned with flour-dusted fingers and a full heart, she found Lord Ashcombe in the garden, pruning roses. "Out without an escort?" he asked, one brow raised. "Didn't know I needed one," she replied, half teasing. "You don't," he said, clipping a stem, "but I noticed I missed your voice in the house." The air between them grew still, not tense, but aware. "You've built something here," she said, "but you've built it for others. When will you let someone build with you?" He didn't answer, just handed her a rose, white, fragrant, perfect. She took it, her fingers brushing his. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't even a promise. But in that moment, beneath the bloom-laced trellis, it felt like a boundary had shifted. One petal, one breath, one choice at a time. The letter arrived sealed with red wax, its emblem unfamiliar, but its contents unmistakably cruel. Marianne found it tucked among the Morning Post, addressed to Lord Ashcombe in a hand too deliberate to ignore. She hadn't meant to read it, but when she entered the study to deliver it, he was already sitting at the desk, hands tight around the opened pages, face pale beneath his usual composure. "It's from my uncle," he said before she could ask. "A reminder that my generosity has limits. That housing a beggar widow with bastard children reflects poorly on the Ashcombe name." Her throat dried at the words. "Do you agree?" He stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the fields. "I used to think a name was everything, that my father's legacy was a map I had to follow, no matter where it led." He turned to face her, his voice lower now. "But then you arrived, and you didn't just survive, you made this house feel alive again." "I didn't mean to bring trouble," she whispered. "You didn't," he replied, stepping closer. "They did. With their rules, their walls, their shame." She shook her head, struggling to speak around the rising ache. "You deserve someone of your world, someone who knows how to dine without flinching, someone without this." She gestured helplessly to her dress, her hands, the invisible scars she wore. "I don't want someone from my world," he said. "I want someone real. Someone who's fought for joy with bruised hands, someone who sees beauty in silence and strength in small kindnesses. I want you." Silence fell like snowfall, heavy and sacred. "But not because you owe me, or feel grateful. Only if your heart remembers mine, the way mine remembers yours." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from recognition. "It does," she whispered. "Even when I tried to forget, it remembered." He reached for her then, no grand kiss or sudden embrace, just his hand, open, waiting. She took it, not as a rescued woman, not as a guest, but as an equal walking beside him. Together, they stepped away from legacy and into something they could name themselves. Not charity, not debt, just love, born quietly in the ashes. The summer sun poured through the windows like gold, warming the stone floors and softening the halls once lined with shadows. The manor was no longer a house of echoes, but a home with laughter in its walls, tiny footsteps on the stairs, and the smell of rosemary bread drifting from the kitchen. Marianne stood in the nursery doorway, watching Eliza and Clara chase each other around the rocking chair, their curls bouncing with joy. They were safe, loved, and finally, hers in every way that mattered. Downstairs, the staff no longer looked at her with politeness. They looked at her with familiarity. Agnes called her dear. The cook asked for her opinion on herbs, and the stable boy shyly gifted her a sketch of the twins he'd drawn in charcoal. She had become more than the woman who once begged in the streets. She had become a part of something. That afternoon she found Lord Ashcombe, Charles, as she now called him without hesitation, walking the perimeter of the orchard. He was trimming branches, his shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat at his brow. "You miss tea," she said with a smile. "And jam. The girls made it themselves. It's mostly flour, but they insist it's strawberry." He chuckled, a sound that still surprised her with its warmth. "I suppose I'll have to survive on biscuits then." She stepped closer. "There's something I want to show you." She led him to the edge of the orchard, where a patch of wildflowers had overtaken an old stone bench. "This is where I first believed," she said quietly. "Not in safety, not even in love, but in the idea that I could be more than what the world left behind." He sat beside her, the breeze playing with the loose strands of her hair. "You've always been more," he said. "I just had to wait for you to see it." She took his hand, not because she needed support, but because she wanted to give it. "We never named this," she murmured. "Us, this life." "We don't have to," he said. "It's not a title. It's a choice we make every morning." Behind them, the twins ran through the orchard, their laughter ringing like bells. Marianne leaned into him, not afraid of what came next. She was no longer the widow in rags. She was a woman with roots, with light, with love. Finally, home.